Good morning, everyone. My name is Lemayian, and I'm a junior at Lowell High School. I'm also a member of the Standing Committee on Cultural Competency, and I'm an officer of the Black Unity Club. I'd like to start to begin by thanking the sponsors of this event, which is the Black Unity Club and the Standing Committee on Cultural Competency. So just a brief introduction to what they are. The Black Unity Club works to celebrate and introduce different aspects of culture to Lowell High School, and the Standing Committee on Cultural Competency works to approach and find resolutions to issues in both the school and the world which affect the Lowell High School community. We also have the goal of creating a safe and inclusive atmosphere in our school. We'd like to start by thanking the Black Unity Club, Miss Cindy Obika, who worked to put this. So, as you all know, February is the month of Black History Month. So, Black History Month is an annual celebration of achievements by Black and African Americans in a time to recognize the central role of African Americans in U.S. history. Black History Month began as Negro History Week, which was created in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson, a noted African American historian, scholar, educator, and publisher. It became a month-long celebration in 1976. The month of February was chosen to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. At this time, I'd like to welcome Black Unity Club advisor Ms. Cindy Obika and the advisor of Standing Committee on Cultural Competency, Mr. Rob DeLosa.
Thank you, guys. I just wanted to say thank you, and that the Black Unity Club works really hard to come up with ideas and to put them together, but we are not going to stand here and try to pretend we did it alone. We've had the help of Mr. DeLosa, Sharon Clark, the TV studio, Brian Wilkins. We love doing events at the school. We thank you for your participation. We hope you enjoy the show, and if you want to join the Black Unity Club, you're more than welcome. You can sign up in D-House. Here's Mr. DeLosa.
I may not look like it, but right now I'm Miss McLeod because Miss McLeod is supposed to be Mr. Martin. So I'm speaking on behalf of the head of school, Mr. Martin, who would like to just convey the pride that we all have in our excellent students from the Black Unity Club and from the Standing Committee on Cultural Competency who have hosted and put on this event. And the head of school wants to just again repeat his and all of the staff's support for inclusion, for diverse voices, both in Lowell High School and in our community. As well, we are very proud that all of our students from the Survey on United States History are here, so that this event in Black History Month becomes an integral part of the U.S. history that we're studying. And I'd like now just to invite Joanne Jaya, who is going to tell us a little bit more about our speaker.
Morning. My name is Joanne. I'm a junior at Lowell High School, and I'm also a co-chair of one of the co-chairs of the Black Unity Club and a member of the Standing Committee on Cultural Competency, and I'm just going to give you a quick introduction on Reverend Jones. Robert Jones has more than 20 years of experience as a performer, musician, storyteller, radio producer, host, and music educator. He has opened for and played with some of the finest musicians in the world. Still, Robert considers his greatest honor to be his call to the gospel ministry. Jones was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1956. His father was from West Point, Mississippi, and his mother hailed from Kennesaw County, Alabama. Consequently, Robert grew up in Detroit in a very Southern household. He grew up listening to and loving a wide variety of music, especially the blues. By the age of 17, Robert had already amassed a record collection of early blues and began to teach himself the guitar and harmonica. By his mid-20s, Robert was hosting an award-winning radio show on WDET-FM Detroit called Blues from the Lowlands. Concentrating primarily on traditional acoustic blues, Robert started performing at some of Detroit's best music venues. On a personal level, in 1985, Robert met Bernice Banks at the Sweet Kingdom Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit, and in 1986 they married and were happily coupled ever since. Influenced by legendary bluesman Willie Dixon, Robert developed an educational program called Blues for Schools. This program has literally taken him into classrooms all over the country, and for approximately the next 15 years, Robert polished his craft as both as a performer and a music educator. Answering a call to ministry, Robert began to study under Reverend James Robinson Sir at the Sweet Kingdom Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit. Emphasizing the cultural, historical, and educational aspects of blues, Jones began to think of his music as an outreach of his ministry. Essentially, he was a singer who preached. In 2002, with his home church in the fourth year of upheaval at the loss of its leader and with no end to the confusion in sight, Robert was called by his home church to become the next pastor. Over a period of a few months, Robert started the process of becoming a preacher who sings instead of a singer who preaches. 2006 marked a decided return to performance. Among Robert's new pursuits is a program that will combine storytelling, vocals, instrumental music, and artwork to explore and showcase the earliest known aspects of African American music and culture. Whether he's performing or teaching alone, or with his wife, Sister Bernice Jones, or with his longtime musical partner, Matt Watroba, Robert continues to share his love and fascination for the roots and branches of blues.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good night. No, I'm just kidding. It's good to be here at Lowell High School, and you guys have been really wonderful getting things started. Want to thank the Black Unity Club, as well as I want to thank Ms. Carol Allen, who runs the New Moon Coffee House in Haverhill, and that's where we're going to be performing on tomorrow night. So you guys have been really great, and for about the next 40 minutes or so, I think we're going to talk a little bit about music, which is something that you know about because just about every young person I've ever ran across has had a love for music, but we don't necessarily like the same kinds of music, right? When I was a kid, my grandmother, as the young lady said, brought home this record, and it sort of changed my life. It was not modern music. It was already old when she brought it home. It was called the blues. It's country blues, as a matter of fact, and it sounded a little bit like this. My baby and me, we never used to fight. Used to love and kiss at night. I came home one morning, she had gone away. Ever since she went away, Lord, no, my heart does nothing but ache. Her address is unknown, Lord, and the blues is here to stay. She gone but not forgotten, tell you the reason why. She had the kind of love that would satisfy. She had love like the ocean rolling that comes in with the tide. Well, I hope, Lord, I hope there comes a day she let her love roll by my way and explain to me herself, Lord, the reason why she left. Now, when you experience music or anything that you love, you can sort of experience it just as it lies. You can just, experience it, like it, never ask another question about it. But when you ask a simple question of where does it come from, then all of a sudden you become a historian in the best sense of the word. And that happened to me with blues. It sort of happened to my daughter, who is now 24 years old, but when she was about 14, she was listening to me practicing a song in the kitchen. Now, she got excited about that song. She said, "Daddy, where'd you learn that song? I love that song too. Daddy, that's my junk, boy." So, when you got the same junk as your 14-year-old, you better stop and find out what it is, because it doesn't happen very often, right? This song may be your junk. The song was 40 years old when I was learning it, but she didn't know that. She didn't know who had written it. She didn't care where it come from. It was written by a guy named Leonard Cohen, who died just last year. This was a song. I heard there was a secret chord David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah. You know that song? Hallelujah, hallelujah. Where'd you learn it? Shrek. Absolutely. Now, the fact that my daughter knew that song, it was a song that just popped up in one of her favorite movies. And when you guys were little, you probably watched Shrek over and over again. You learned that song. Your little brothers and sisters will go to see the movie Sing, and because that song shows up there, and they will think of it as being the song that Jennifer Hudson sings in that movie. But the fact of the matter is, that song has a history. It goes way back, much further than most of us know. So when we start to ask that simple question, where does the song come from? It opens up a door. It opens up a door that allows us to learn history in sort of the coolest way I can imagine. So if we find out where the blues came from, we got to go back in time to something called the spiritual. It's no longer 2017, but imagine it's about 1840, and you're standing in front of an old weather-beaten building in the Deep South. There's a reason I took you back to 1840, and there's a reason I took you to the Deep South, because this country is a lot different then than it is now, right? So you're standing in front of this weather-beaten building. Windows and the doors are flung open to get a breeze through because it's a nice hot day. That's imagination too. And you get this song coming from the inside. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Now, obviously, that weather-beaten building is a church. And that song is still around because I heard some of you singing it, right? But the fact of the matter is, each church is different, and you can tell something about the people in that church by the music coming out of that church. Go 500 feet down the road, and this time you hear music coming out of a barn or a stable or maybe even a stand of trees. This is what Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, called the invisible church, because in 1840 in the Deep South, the slaves on that plantation probably would not have felt or even been welcome in that white church. So when they worship, they might sing the same song, but it comes out a little differently, maybe more like, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. I see. All right? Sometimes I go to elementary schools and I ask kids, is that the same song? And they go, no. And the reason they can't recognize it is because it sounds so different in those two places. Well, what is it that changes that music, that makes it sound one way in a white church and another way in a black church? And part of that idea is the fact that when we came to this continent, no matter where we came from, we brought a scale with us. We brought the idea of the way we thought music should sound. In Europe, we bring this scale. In West Africa, we sing this scale. They start on the same note, end on the same note, but get there differently. So that this 5-note scale, we call the minor pentatonic scale or the blues scale. Step into the bad side. So you end up with that scale. And when you're in the church, you can decide which scale you're trying to sing to or choose something in the middle. But maybe more important is the fact that this music was not written down. When you write it down, it becomes classical. So if you sing it one way and you write it in a hymnal, your father sings, Amazing Grace, and you sing, Amazing Grace, and your grandson sings, Amazing Grace. And 7 generations later, your great-great-great-great-granddaughter moves to Boston, joins the Glee Club, and she sings, Amazing Grace. And the song doesn't change much. But what happens in those places where you don't write it down? You pass it down. Like the game telephone you guys probably played when you were little. Whisper something in one person's ear, and by the time it gets to the end of the line, it's rarely the same message. Well, if you're not listening to your music, having it written down, it tends to change. So your father would sing, Amazing Grace, and you might decide it's not fancy enough and make it, Amazing Grace. Or your son falls in love with that pretty girl from Kentucky. When she sings The Baby's Asleep, she's been known to sing, Amazing Grace. And 7 generations later, your great-great-great-great-granddaughter Aretha moves to Detroit, gets a gig at the Super Bowl, and she sings, Ooh. That's just 2 words. 20 minutes later, not only have you heard Amazing Grace, but you experienced the folk process. Now, the fact of the matter is this music is constantly changing, and one of the things that sometimes is hard for younger people to understand is that music is there for more than entertainment. People use music to work. People use music for funerals. They use music for community. And in the Deep South, when people were listening, the African and the European right next to each other, they started to influence each other's music in amazing ways. So nobody had, for example, a 1949 Epiphone guitar back in those days. Chances are your instruments would have been a lot simpler. Would have been the kind of thing that sometimes you had to make yourself. So, could you imagine that on a plantation, somebody made something that looked like this? Now, what do you guys think this is? Absolutely. It's a banjo, but it's the ancestor of all banjos. The idea is that in West Africa, if you took a gourd, like a squash, cut the top off, stretch skin over it, you had a drum. But the drum was a dangerous instrument in the hands of a West African, and you could communicate with drumming. And so people outlawed the drum, but didn't outlaw the drum with strings on it, the banjo. Now, these strings originally would have been made out of gut because you didn't throw anything away. And it has no metal parts other than the tacks that hold the head onto the gourd. And the way you play it is a little unusual. You play it like a drum. It's called claw hammer. You form your hand into a claw. You hammer on the on the head of the banjo, almost like a drum, but you let the strings get in the way, and you come up with a rhythm. So then you teach a song, not by writing it down, but by passing it down. In fact, you do something called call and response. What I sing to you, sing it back to me. Wade in the water, you sing wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Good, that's the chorus. Wade in the water, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Look over yonder, all dressed in red. God's gonna trouble the water. Look like the children that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Look over yonder, all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. Look like the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Everybody sing, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Yeah, God's gonna trouble the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Good job. Now, if you're singing that song on a plantation, probably means there's about to be an escape. Because if you decide to run for freedom in the north, to get to a place like Michigan or Ohio or Massachusetts, and you want to get to freedom, dogs and hounds are on your trail. What's the best way to get them off your scent? Water. Wade in the water means hide your track in the river. It means the dogs can't pick it up. It means you got to navigate on your own. So you might get a line like, the Jordan River is deep and cold. God's gonna trouble the water. Chill my body, but not my soul. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, again, if you've got a book in your house, whether you can read or not, chances are in 1840, 1850, that book is the Bible. And so you draw from Bible stories. The children of Israel, when they cross across the River Jordan, they cross into the Promised Land. For the slave, when he crossed or she crossed the Ohio River, they cross into the Promised Land. And so these old spirituals carry with them a lot of information. It's almost like the music that you guys listen to that your parents don't understand. And so when you're listening and you're listening to this music and they're going, oh my God, that's wonderful. What does that mean? And you couldn't tell them because it would blow their minds, right? So if you were on that plantation, if you sang that song, the person who owns the plantation probably does not realize what you're singing about, but you're really singing about freedom. Again, where does the song come from? It opens up a history. It took about 100 years for this kind of banjo to evolve into what we now call a Pete Seeger kind of banjo. This one has an extra long neck. And Pete Seeger, if you don't know who he was a great songwriter, great singer, a great champion of civil rights. But one of the things he did is he also sort of introduced America, or reintroduced America to the idea of the banjo. And so it allows us to go back and realize some of the songs our ancestors sang. How would you recruit soldiers, black soldiers, for the Civil War if you didn't have an internet, if you didn't have a radio or a television? You do it with a song, right? Soldiers would sit around and sing a song kind of like this one. listen to the trumpeters. They call for volunteers on Zion's bright and flowery mountains. Behold the officers, oh, they look like men. They look like men. They look like men of war, all armed and dressed in uniform. They look like men of war. It sets my heart quite in a flame, a soldier thus to be. I will enlist, gird on my arms, and fight for liberty. Oh, we look like men. We look like men. We look like men of war, all armed and dressed in uniform. We look like men of war. Our armor bright, our horses white, how boldly brave we stand, enlisted soldiers for our king, to march to freedom land. Oh, we look like men. We look like men. We look like men of war, all armed and dressed in uniform. We look like men of war. We want no cowards in our band who will their colors fly. We call for valiant-hearted men who are not afraid to die. Oh, we look like men. We look like men. We look like men of war, all armed and dressed in uniform. We look like men of war. Oh, we look like men. We look like men. We look like men of war, all armed and dressed in uniform. We look like men of war. Yeah. Now that's something that would probably make you want to go sign up, right? Well, maybe. The banjo becomes this amazing part of American history. And you could not have had Americans' music really without the influence of black music mixing with European music. So we don't need to discount the fact that this instrument that came to us by way of Europe, which is, of course, what? Violin, but also a fiddle. It becomes a fiddle because of the way you use it. Violin is a classical instrument. Some of you have had violin lessons. You have teachers who say things like, practice holding your violin without using your left hand. And you get sheet music, and you get a scale. And when you first bring your violin home, your mother is so proud. She says, practice in the living room. But after you practice those scales for 2 hours, she says, go in the basement, baby, go in the basement. Fiddle is worse. Fiddle is what happens when you don't get the lessons, you don't get the teacher, you don't get the scale, you don't even get necessarily the proper way to hold this thing. And so you're in town and you hear some guy playing the banjo, that bump, chicka bump, chicka bump, chicka bump. And you come home and you tell your wife, I'm gonna teach myself how to play that on the fiddle, baby, so get out the way. But you don't have a teacher. So the way you hold it is up to you. Some people hold it here, some people down here. It's really up to you how you handle your fiddle. Even how you tune your fiddle. So, I want to introduce you to a person. You may know him, you may not. Here's a guy by the name of Ralph Stanley. If you've ever watched the movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Ralph Stanley is the guy behind the Klan mask singing Oh Death. So Ralph Stanley was not a Klansman. As a matter of fact, he was a pretty cool guy. And he was a guy who championed this idea of how white music mixes with black music to create American music. So if you were down in a praise house, maybe in Kentucky or Tennessee, you might hear a different kind of spiritual music. It might sound like this. Two coats stood before me, and old and new. I asked my Lord, Savior, Lord, what must I do? The first coat was ugly, all tattered and torn. The other a new one that ain't never been worn. I'll tell you the best thing I ever did do. I took off the old coat and I put on the new. Now this new coat, it suits me and it keeps me so warm. It's good in the winter and it's good in the storm. My Savior has blessed me with a garment so rare. He bought me this new coat you now see me wear. I'll tell you the best thing I ever did do. I took off the old coat and I put on the new. I'll tell you the best thing I ever did do. I took off the old coat and I put on the new. Thank you. Now, chances are pretty good you're never going to turn on your top 10 radio hits and hear something like that. But that's this music that helps to form American music. From that fiddle, from the listening to black music and white music, you start to get this idea of the rhythm of the fiddle. In American fiddling, this banjo rhythm ends up on the fiddle. Baby, don't say a word, little lady, sail away. Gonna be an angel by and by. Sail away, lady, sail away. Sail away, lady, sail away. So, okay. I spent a fair amount of time in the 19th century because that's the building block of the music we get in the 20th century. Some of the music I played for you so far has been fairly familiar, and some of it's been kind of unfamiliar. But when we get into the 20th century, we start to get into the music that we can kind of see the connection between the 19th and the 21st century. We get the music that we might listen to on the radio, or buy a CD, or end up listening to, watching on television. So before you had artists rappelling from the roof of the Houston Astrodome, or explosions on stage, or wardrobe malfunctions, you ended up with this simple kind of folk music that in the 20th century would lead to the music of our mothers our grandmothers or grandfathers, and eventually to us. So let's say, how much time do I have? Cool, good. So let's get into the music of the 20th century, right? Around the start of the let's say around the 1900s, 19-teens, you'll have this style of music that starts to rise called the blues, right? Blues is really fairly simple. It's based around 3 chords, around 5 notes. And it's based around the ability to tell a story in verses. So let's say, for example, I had the blues this morning. Well, you know, I drove from Detroit. Oh, you know, the weather was mighty dark. No, I drove from Detroit. You know, the sky was mighty dark. Well, you know, I got to Massachusetts, and I didn't have nowhere to park. Then I got to Lowell High School. Everybody treated me mighty nice. You know, I got to Lowell High School. Folks treated me mighty nice. You know, then I met the principal. Oh, or maybe he was really the vice. Well, I'm gonna sing this verse, and I ain't gonna sing no more. You know, I'm gonna sing this verse, and I ain't gonna sing no more. But you know, I'm just glad to be here, and I'm gonna sit down on the floor. Right? Bunch of nonsense verses, thank you. This idea of the blues allowed you to sing for the first time about things you wanted to sing about. You know, you could sing about dogs that wouldn't hunt. You could sing about jobs that you hated, and women, cars that wouldn't start, money and the lack thereof, and women. Women sing about men, but men sing about women. So I want you to imagine, it's about 1917, and you got this guy in Mississippi, and he's singing about his woman. Her name is Thelma. I don't run into too many Thelmas in modern days, so it's usually a safe name. And Thelma's giving him the blues. So he comes up with this line like this. I got a T for Texas, ooh, well, T for Tennessee. I got a T for Texas, T for Tennessee. I got a T for Thelma, Lord, that woman gave the blues to me. Now, the fact of the matter is, black guys are not the only ones who get the blues. So there's a young white railroad worker. His name is Jimmy Rogers. And Jimmy Rogers comes along at the start of the 1920s when they're making records. So for the first time, you can actually listen to an artist. The artist can be in Mississippi, but you can hear the record in Boston, or in Detroit, or Chicago, or anywhere else in the world. And so when this guy gets around to recording this song, he doesn't sing it the way the black guy would. He changes it like this. I got a T for Texas, T for Tennessee. I got a T for Texas, T for Tennessee. I got a T for Thelma, the one who gave the blues to me. Yodelay, yodelay. your parents ask you what you did in school today, you can tell them we heard a black man yodel. That was kind of interesting. But that guy, the moment that Jimmy Rogers put the yodel on the blues, it became what? Country music. And so country music is tied forever to the idea of blues music. It's both poor folks' music, just trying to make it through, right? When we get to the blues, we find that we have this spine that runs all through the 20th century. Those 3 chords and those 5 notes form the basis for something called boogie woogie piano. Left hand of the piano player playing the 5 notes, with the right hand playing these chords. Won't you hand me down my jumper? Won't you iron my overalls? Won't you hand me down my jumper? Won't you iron my overalls? Well, I'm about to catch a train, what they call a cannonball. That was hot stuff in the 1920s. But by the time the 1930s rolled around, America was in a Great Depression. Folks were on the move. They were on the move from the south up into the north, to black churches where they could find work. Those black piano players started to make black church music sound like boogie woogie. But they didn't call it church boogie woogie, they called it gospel. Like this. Well, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. But it was still the same 3 chords in the same 5 notes. Move up into 1935 and you get a style of country music called bluegrass. 5 white guys standing around a microphone, wearing cowboy hats, going, yee-haw! Not very black music at all. But there is blues and bluegrass because of a man by the name of Arnold Schultz, who never got to record, but a black man who taught Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass, the fundamentals of blues. And there was a guitar player by the name of Lester Flack, who used to play something called the G-Run. Now, Lester wasn't black, but Lester understood the importance of that pentatonic scale. So at the end of every one of those lines, he'd play, which is just played with a flat pick. So you end up with songs like, I'm going down the road feeling bad. Well, I'm going down the road feeling bad. Well, I'm going down the road feeling bad. Lord, Lord, I ain't gonna be treated there so bad. Yeehaw! Same 3 chords, same 5 notes. Now it's about 1955 and you got a television in your house. It's a big wooden box with a little bitty screen. It only gets 3 channels. There's nothing wrong with your cable, ladies and gentlemen. There are only 3 channels. And that means everybody sort of watches the same thing at the same time. That means on Sunday night, everybody would be tuned to CBS to see this young man up from Memphis, Tennessee. A guy steps out and introduces and says, ladies and gentlemen, we have a really good show for you tonight. Well, you're gonna like this young man. He comes from Tupelo, Mississippi, by way of Memphis, Tennessee, and he uses 3 chords and 5 notes. Kid walks out on the stage and goes, 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get a run, now go, cat, go, we're gonna choose, boss with my blue suede shoes. You can do anything to say, oh, my blue suede shoes. Well, blue suede shoes, blue suede shoes, blue suede shoes, blue suede shoes. You can do anything but say, oh, my blue suede shoes. Thank you very much. Who is that guy? Elvis is the king of what? Rock and roll. But rock and roll has 2 kings. And this is really important to black history. When you think about it, in the segregated South, there were people who were concerned that their white kids were listening to black music. And Elvis was really drawing on a lot of black music. But there were also people who were concerned that white kids, well, there were white kids who wanted to be Chuck Berry, and there were black kids who wanted to be Elvis. So they were breaking down barriers by listening to each other's music. Who was Chuck Berry? Chuck Berry was the black king of rock and roll. What happens when you get a black man singing country music to a blues beat? Maybelline, why can't you be true? And folks say, Chuck, young folks are dancing farther apart and dancing faster, you gotta speed it up. So Chuck speeds it up so much that it becomes. Way down in Louisiana, down in New Orleans, back up in the woods among the evergreens. Stood in old cabin made of earth and wood, with a little boy named Johnny B. Good. That little boy can never read or write so well. He can play the guitar just like the ringing of a bell. Say go, go Johnny, go, go. Go Johnny, go, go, go. Go Johnny, go, go. Go Johnny, go, go, go. Yeah, Johnny be good. Thank you. But rock and roll is the same 5 notes and the same 3 chords. And then we move into the mid-60s. Let's say you're in the Deep South and you see 5 good-looking black guys who are touring in the South. And a high school like this would have been impossible in the Deep South in the mid-60s. You would have had a rope down the middle of a gymnasium or an auditorium, or the black kids would have been in the balcony and the young white kids would have been down front. Something to separate them, because the idea was that they thought the races had to be separated. But when those young white kids and those young black kids heard those 5 notes coming out of Detroit, heard what they did when they slowed them down, and played with the rhythm, those kids tore down the rope and started to dance together. I got sunshine on a cloudy day. When it's cold outside, I've got the month of May. Help me sing it. Well, I guess you say, what can make me feel this way, my girl? Talking about my girl, my girl. Ooh. Yeah, good job. Thank you. You remember I told you guys that it's important to understand that music is for more than entertainment. Sometimes it starts off in one form and ends up as something else. There was a young man by the name of Sam Cooke, and I'm throwing all these names out, and I'm hoping you guys will go and Google some of these people. But there was a young gospel singer named Sam Cooke who became a popular singer, a pop singer. And then he recorded something in 1964 that really became a folk song, became part of this thing called the Civil Rights Movement. And it was about the fact that he and his band were rejected at a hotel. They couldn't just check in like everybody else. And he sits down and he writes this song. He puts it on the B side. In other words, not the side of the record that you want to buy, a record called Shake. He puts it on the B side of Shake. And it's a song that continues to resonate. You probably heard it when President Obama was inaugurated the first time. That song was this. I was born by a river in a little tent, ooh, and just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I knew change gonna come, ooh, yes it will. like this line. And I go to the movies and I go downtown. Somebody always selling me, don't want you hanging around. It's been a long time coming, but I knew change gon' come. Ooh, yes it will. So you see, these songs, they start in one place and they continue on generation after generation. We enjoy them differently, we appreciate them differently. But there's one more song I want you guys to know about. This is maybe one of the older songs I do. It was recorded in 1928 by a man named Son House. And Son House was a Delta blues man. They used to retune the guitar to an open chord. And before people had synthesizers, if you wanted to get in between the notes, you played what was called slide guitar, right? So this guy used to play slide guitar. And he used to do a song called the Death Letter Blues. Songs long and depressing. I don't have time to do the whole song for you. I'll do a couple verses the way it was originally recorded in 1928, and then we'll figure something out. Song starts like this. I got a letter this morning, how you ring it red? Said hurry, hurry, cause the girl your love is dead. Got a letter this morning, oh Lord, how you think it reads? It said hurry, hurry, cause the gal your love is dead. You know, I packed up my suitcase, took off down the road. When I got there, she was laying on the cooling board. I packed up my suitcase, Lord, and I took off down the road. When I got there, she was laying out on the cooling board. Well, I'm gonna wrap it up right now because I know you guys gotta be going. But you know, I would really love to do that whole song for you. The only way I can do that whole song in a minute and a half is to modify it. In fact, to modernize it. Instead of doing each verse twice, I could do each verse once. I could speed up the tempo of the song, fade the music out, in which case this becomes the 1928 Death Letter Blues 2017, the remix. So you guys have been a really great audience. Thank you so much for your attention and your wonderful reception. And again, if you're not doing anything, tomorrow night, New Moon Coffee House at the Haverhill Unitarian Universalist Church, is it? So come by and see whole songs, everything. It'll be wonderful. So anyway, this is what happens when you remix that song in 2017. I got a letter this morning, how do you think it read? Said, hurry, hurry, cause the gal you love is dead. You know I packed up my suitcase, took off down the road. When I got there, she was laying out on the cooling board. I eased up close and I looked down in her face and said, hey, you know I love you, but I just can't take your place. It seemed like the thousand was standing around the funeral ground. I didn't know how much I loved her till they put my baby in the ground before my arms. And then I walked away and said, hey, you know I love you, I have to see you judgment day. I woke up this morning, it was about to break a day, and I was hugging on a pillow where my baby used to lay. I went to church, bowed down, I tried to pray, but the blues come along and they blowed my spirit away. Woke up this morning about the break of day, and I was hugging on a pillow where my baby used to lay. I said, hush, I thought I heard her call my name. She didn't call so loud, but you called so plain. Yeah, boy. Thank you.
I was told you were a storyteller. Can I hear a story?
Can you get a story?
Yeah.
The idea is really, that whole thing we just did was a story. It was a story of how things move from point A to point B. There are all these kind of stories that pop up in African American culture about you know, when you guys were probably little, you probably heard the stories about Tar Baby and all these traditional stories that just let you know how folks who don't have the advantage turn around and get the advantage through their smarts and through trickery or through whatever it takes to get the advantage. So nothing's popping into my head right now, but the whole story, the whole thing we just did was really one big long story. Okay? Cool, thank you. Cool.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing good.
Good.
So, did you teach yourself how to play all these instruments?
Yes, I did. Basically, it was a matter of picking up an instrument, find a tune that you know, find a tune that you really want to learn how to play. Once you can figure that tune out, you've learned a lot about the fundamentals of how to play the instrument as you go. So, you know, if you're a younger student, you can start off with guitar exercise number 4 or whatever. But when you're an older guy, you got to like learn songs and just figure them out as best you can.
Interesting.
Cool. Hey.
All right. Oh, that was louder than I thought. All right. All right. So you just did your whole story about blues from the past and kind of the origins of rock and how rock and other kinds of music kind of evolved from the blues.
Sure.
I guess my question is, where do you see like that form of blues today? Like what do you have on your iPod, for example, there?
That's a good question. I have a lot of old music on my iPod, but also, I mean, there are artists who take an old song by a guy named Woody Guthrie. Okay. Take a trip with me to 1913 to Calumet, Michigan, in the copper country. Take it to a place called the Italian Hall, where the miners are having their big Christmas ball. Do the same thing I just did with Death Letter Blues and speed it up, and you end up with, take a trip with me to 1913 to Calumet, Michigan, copper country. I'll take you to a place at the Italian Hall, where the miners are having their big Christmas ball. You end up with Eminem. Or you end up with, you know, Chance the Rapper, who just did this presentation right at the Grammys, but he had a gospel choir around him. So you've got this whole idea of the music constantly just being remixed and reinvented. So there are people that I used to really like Kanye West before he lost his mind, but there are some people that I really like. I like Adele. I like, you know, various people. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. He walks cool. Okay. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
I taught myself how to play instruments too. So I was just wondering, like, the way you taught yourself how to play all these instruments, if there's like an easier way to do it. Because I use YouTube a lot to teach myself.
YouTube is very handy, especially if you find in more obscure styles or more obscure songs and you're looking for the way they're played. YouTube's a great tool, not only to teach yourself how to play, but it's a great tool to find out more about your music, because usually not only do you call up who you're looking for, but then it sends you these related links. And before you know it, you can spend the whole night just looking at artists that you never knew existed. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And the other thing too about teaching yourself how to play, this is a wonderful thing, is that, you know, this music, we've gotten to the point where electronically we can do a lot of different things, but there's nothing like being able to sit there and organically play your own music, because nobody's gonna say what you have to say but you. So I'm really great and elated to hear that that process is still going on. Folks are still learning and teaching themselves how to play their own music, so congratulations.
Mom didn't want to pay for it, so you might as well learn the freeway, right?
Absolutely. I got a letter this morning, how you ring it red, said hurry, hurry, cause girl, your love is dead. Got a letter this morning,